what is matter and what is its source. And elucidation of the nature of space, as it turns out, holds the key to understanding the nature of matter and its source. We see that an inherent energetic structure, and as we will explore more in section 2 of the course, lesson 2, of the entanglement nexus of the unified space memory network, we'll see that as well. An informational structure and dynamic of space itself gives rise to a specific geometry and dynamic that becomes the identifiable substance of physical systems, what we call particles. In short, the way that space is curved and spun, the torque, the spin, and its curvature give rise to kind of the illusionary experience of physicality. Like there's something solid there, there's matter there. But it's this dynamic, this spin and curvature that is giving that property. So, kind of going back to that initial statement, there's nothing in the world except empty curved space. Of course, empty space, what does that mean? But these particles are only excitations of the ubiquitous energetic structure of space. So all the physical stuff is fundamentally ether. We are ethereal beings because we're made of matter, and matter is made of particles, and particles are this geometry and informational dynamic of space. So this has, that point becomes very important because, especially when we get into lesson 4, when we start looking at sentience and intelligence in the universe, awareness, because of the idea of Cartesian dichotomy between this seeming mental realm and a physical realm. That there's these two separate domains. One is the mental qualia of subjective experience that exists apart and independent of the quote unquote physical world. And the physical world is just this inanimate, unfeeling, unaware matter. Well, if we see that our conception of what is and isn't physical is misguided, our common sense experience of this is not getting it entirely correct. So this becomes important in seeing the relationship of mind to matter and vice versa, which we'll get into in particular in lesson 4. But the answer to the question, what is matter and what is its source, as it turns out, was simply stated by Nikola Tesla. All matter comes from a primary substance, the luminiferous ether. So a disclaimer, it's kind of a verboten term to use ether and luminiferous ether. It certainly has been over the last 100 years in science, because it was erroneously assumed that this luminiferous ether had been disproven, and if not disproven, that it was unnecessary for any models of physics to describe behaviors and characteristics of the physical world. So it probably doesn't exist, it's not needed. But as we're finding out, as science is learning more, as we're learning more, there is an ether. And you can even find some pretty prominent physicists, Nobel laureates, uh, Frank Wilczek, for instance, who use specifically that term when they're describing the nature and source of matter. It's ether. So this is simply stated, but the how does this happen? So it's the elucidation of the details is where we get into some extremely interesting properties of the nature of this ether or space or the quantum vacuum, whatever term you might like to use for it. And this brings us back to John Archibald Wheeler and quantum geometrodynamics. So this was Wheeler was one of the first to apply the principles of quantum mechanics to general relativity's geometrization of space-time. He demonstrated the quantum structure of space at the microscale, what he referred to as quantum space-time foam. Returning again to this slide. So the applications of quantum mechanics to general relativity, in part, in an endeavor to develop one of the first unified field theories, led Wheeler to the approach to unification known as quantum geometrodynamics. So this led Wheeler to coin some interesting terminology, which he was always really great at doing. It's become the terminology he's coined for many of these novel concepts has become part of the standard lexicon of science to describe them. Quantum field theory and general relativity can be explained following a unified mechanism, the geometrical structure of multiply connected space. In quantum geometrodynamics, all particles and forces can be explained purely from the geometrical structure of space and the informational dynamic of their interrelationships. And for the more technically inclined among us, you may note that this is resurfaced in some of the most advanced theoretical models that are being worked on right now, like conformal field theory and anti-de Sitter holographic correspondence, which we look at a result of that in terms of the quantum space-time foam, the connectivity of space and its relationship to quantum properties, particularly like entanglement. The space-time geometry that underlies quantum entanglement and really how entanglement glues space together. So space is fundamentally entangled, which is one of the reasons why when you bring a pair of particles to the vacuum state, they become entangled, even if they've never interacted. If they can be in at separate locations on the Earth, and you bring them into the vacuum state in a particular way, you can get them entangled. That's something that we'll be looking at as well. It's called entanglement farming, entanglement harvesting. You can harvest entanglement from the vacuum, this entanglement nexus. So note the term geon, and this is a really interesting concept because that was his term given for the idea of a gravitationally confined energetic object. So a massless object that, due to its own self-energy, adopts a very specific gravitational confinement, that is a geometry of space, that in Archibald's summation gives rise to matter. And so this is another term. It comes from the quantum geometrodynamics, that is mass without mass, charge without charge. So, those are some fundamental properties. How do you describe mass and charge? This is one approach to do so. And so essentially, you can even consider like light. You get enough light in a single location, because light has energy. It curves space-time. If you get enough of it, the light will try to travel in a straight line, but it's curving space-time so strongly that it curves back on itself. It starts to form this torus, this toroidal geometry in space. And you get all of a sudden this boundary condition, this gradient in the space-time structure. And this is probably fairly reminiscent to those who followed the work here with double torus geometry and its underlying cuboctahedral symmetry. So the 64 tetrahedron grid and the double torus dynamic. And when you're looking at that in terms of these geons, you can begin to explain source of matter and how it comes about, and how we have an experience of the physical